She looked me dead in the eyes and said it. The words came out sharp, like a knife I didn't see coming. You're not my real mother. I'm going to live with the woman who actually wanted me. Lila stood there in my kitchen, an 18-year-old suitcase already packed by her bedroom door. Her face was hard in a way I'd never seen before. Behind her, visible through the window of the silver car parked in our driveway, sat Claire. The woman who'd torn my marriage apart. The woman who'd abandoned a baby at a hospital like she was discarding trash. That woman smiled at me from across the lawn like she just won something precious. I watched as Lila grabbed her suitcase. Aaron, my husband of 20 years, stood in the corner with his eyes on the floor. He didn't say a word. He didn't tell his daughter to stay. He didn't tell her what was true. He just stood there letting it happen. The silence in that room felt like drowning. I opened my mouth to speak but nothing came out. What do you say when the person you've loved like your own daughter tells you she never really loved you back? When the man you built a life with abandons you again just like he had once before? I whispered something I didn't even recognize. If leaving makes you happy, go. Then she left. My name is Sophie Quinn. And this is the story of how I learned that love doesn't always come home. 18 years ago, I made a choice that I thought would define me. I married Aaron on a beautiful spring day when we both believed forever was possible. He was a high school teacher, charming in a way that made every room feel brighter. I loved him with the kind of desperate, all-consuming love that young people give to people who seem to understand them. But 3 years into our marriage, I learned that forever was more complicated than I'd imagined. Aaron had been unfaithful. It happened during a time when we were struggling, when his mother was sick, when money was tight. He admitted it immediately. He cried. He begged me to forgive him. The other woman, Claire, had been a substitute teacher at his school. When she realized she was pregnant, she disappeared for 6 months. Then she abandoned the baby at St. Mary's Hospital with nothing but a note that said, "I can't do this." That's when everything changed. Aaron brought the baby home. She was only 3 days old. So tiny, so helpless, so completely innocent of all the betrayal and pain that created her. I remember standing in our living room, looking at this fragile infant Aaron held in his arms like he was terrified she might break. He was crying. "Sophie," he said, his voice shaking, "I know I have no right to ask, but she's innocent. She didn't choose any of this." I should have said no. I should have left him that day. I had every reason to. But when he placed that baby in my arms, something shifted inside me. She was so small. Her eyes looked up at me without judgment or expectation. She was just a baby who needed someone to love her. "What's her name?" I asked. Aaron's voice was barely audible. "The hospital doesn't know. There's no paperwork. She's nobody's child right now." I looked down at her tiny face, at her small fists, at the way she seemed to trust me instinctively. "Then we'll give her one," I said. "Her name is Lila." I held her close that night, making promises I didn't know if I could keep. I whispered to her about the life we'd build together, about how she'd never feel unwanted or abandoned like her mother had made her feel. I swore I'd be the mother that Claire never was. I meant every word. The late-night feedings were torture at first. Every cry made me angry. Every time I held her, I was reminded of what Aaron had done, of the woman he'd been with, of the betrayal that had created this innocent life. But somewhere between the 3rd week and the 1st month, something shifted inside me. Love didn't arrive suddenly. It grew quietly like roots spreading beneath the surface, and one morning I woke up and realized I would die for this child. Just when I thought we were finally finding peace, Claire reappeared like a ghost. She showed up at our doorstep on a Tuesday afternoon, 7 months after abandoning Lila at the hospital. She was thin and agitated, wearing clothes that didn't fit right. She demanded to see her baby. I told her no. She had no legal claim. She'd abandoned the child. But Aaron, always weak in the places I was strong, said she could visit just once. I was furious. I told him it was a mistake. He promised it would be the only time. That promise meant nothing. Claire came inside with sharp eyes that scanned our home like she was calculating its value. She looked at Lila the way a vulture looks at something dying. When Claire held the baby, she didn't smile or coo or do any of the things a real mother would do. She just held her stiffly like Lila was a prop in some game she was playing. Before she left, Claire leaned close to me and whispered something I'll never forget. "You can play mother," she said, her breath hot against my ear, "but she'll always be mine." That night I overheard Aaron on the phone. He was speaking quietly into his cell phone in the garage, thinking I was asleep. I recognized her voice through the speaker. "Claire." He was telling her that he'd help her get on her feet. That he'd always care about her. That she could call him anytime. When I confronted him the next morning, he tried to explain. He said he was just being compassionate. That Claire was struggling. That this didn't mean anything. But it meant everything. It meant I was starting to lose him all over again. I begged Aaron to understand what was happening. I told him that forgiveness wasn't infinite. That second chances could run out if you weren't careful. He swore he was just helping. He said his guilt about the affair was eating him alive, and helping Claire was the only way to ease it. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him because the alternative was admitting that I'd sacrificed my marriage, my career, my entire youth to a man who would never choose me over his own weakness. Meanwhile, Lila was growing. By 18 months, she was saying simple words. By 2 years old, she called me Mama. That word, that single word, made every sacrifice feel worth it. But then a photograph surfaced online. Aaron, Claire, and baby Lila at a cafe downtown. They looked like a family. I saw it because someone at work showed it to me, whispering behind their hand like it was gossip. It wasn't gossip. It was evidence. Evidence that Aaron was building a separate life with the woman he'd cheated with. Evidence that I wasn't enough to keep him. Evidence that everything I'd done, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of choosing to love this child when I could have walked away, none of it mattered. That photograph stayed burned in my mind for years. I began to understand something that most people never learn. Love is not enough. You can give everything and still lose. You can sacrifice your life and still find yourself abandoned. The whispers at work grew louder. Co-workers who used to smile at me started treating me differently. I was the woman raising her husband's loved child. The woman who stayed with a man who'd cheated. The woman who wasn't strong enough to leave. I caught people talking in break rooms, stopping mid-sentence when they saw me. Their pity was worse than their judgment. I came home one day and almost packed a bag. I almost left them both. I sat on the edge of my bed with my suitcase open, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. Then Lila appeared in my doorway. She was only 4 years old, but somehow she knew something was wrong. She crawled into my lap with her stuffed rabbit and just sat there, her small hand patting my arm the way I'd patted her so many times. "Don't cry, Mama," she whispered. "You're sad." I held her close and realized that leaving wasn't actually a choice. I had chosen this child. Even if the world didn't understand, even if my husband betrayed me every single day, even if people judged me, I couldn't leave her. So I dried my tears and decided to prove everyone wrong. I would build a beautiful life with this girl. I would make so much love that it would fill every empty space Aaron left behind. I doubled down on motherhood with a fierceness that surprised even me. I left my corporate job and started working flexible positions I could do from home. I was there for every first day of school, every childhood illness, every nightmare. Aaron apologized that night. He said he'd been selfish. He said he was done with Claire. But even as the words left his mouth, his phone buzzed. A text from her lit up the screen. He silenced it quickly, but I'd already seen her name. I wanted to believe that love could conquer everything. I wanted to believe that if I just kept trying, if I just kept forgiving, Aaron would eventually become the man I'd fallen in love with. We renewed our vows quietly one night in our bedroom, just the two of us. No ceremony, no witnesses, just his promises and my fragile hope. For years after that, I built something beautiful. It wasn't always real, but it looked real. Lila grew up bright and beautiful and affectionate. She loved me completely and without reservation. She called me Mama without hesitation. To anyone looking from the outside, we were a family. I'd created the life I'd promised that tiny baby in our living room 18 years ago. Lila was never made to feel unwanted. She was never made to feel like an accident. She was wanted. She was chosen. She was loved. I gave her everything I had. But underneath the beautiful facade, something was rotting. Aaron was disappearing more and more. Late nights at work became routine. His phone was always in his pocket, guarded. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was the reason his life felt empty. And Claire was still out there, still texting him, still poisoning the well even though she'd moved away years before. I didn't know it, but our family had an expiration date. I didn't know that everything I'd built was about to come crashing down. When Lila was 14, I found something that broke me all over again. I was cleaning her room, stripping beds to wash the sheets, when a pile of envelopes fell out from under her mattress. They were letters. Old letters from Claire. I shouldn't have opened them, but I did. They painted a story I'd been dreading for years. Claire claimed I'd stolen her baby. She said she'd wanted Lila, but circumstances had forced her to give her up. She wrote about how much she'd missed her daughter. She talked about her sacrifice, in a way that twisted the narrative completely. She never mentioned abandoning Lila at a hospital. She never mentioned not wanting her. In Claire's letters, she was the victim, and I was the villain. When Lila came home from school that day, I confronted her. I asked her why she had hidden these letters. I told her I was trying to protect her, that Claire wasn't being honest. Lila looked at me with an expression that made my heart break. "Why would you hide them from me?" she asked. "I have a right to know my real mother." I tried to explain that Claire had abandoned her, that I was protecting her from being hurt. But Lila called me a liar. She said I was keeping her from the truth. Aaron, standing in the kitchen pretending to make dinner, said nothing. His silence was louder than any words could have been. That night, Lila snuck into her room and texted Claire on social media. I didn't know it then, but my entire life was about to change. The reconnection happened gradually, then all at once. Claire started texting Lila, and my daughter started texting back. She began sneaking out to meet with her in parks and coffee shops. I'd wake up at midnight and find her bed empty. She'd come home smelling like someone else's perfume. She'd lock her bedroom door and talk on the phone with Claire for hours, her voice dropping to whispers so I couldn't hear. Our relationship deteriorated like a building with a faulty foundation. Calls went unanswered. Hugs were rejected. Doors slammed. I watched my baby pull away from me and move toward the woman who'd abandoned her without a second thought. One night, I overheard her on a video call with Claire. "I love you, Mom," Lila said. Those 4 words destroyed me. Mom. Not Mama. Not the nickname she called me since she was 2 years old. Mom. The way you call a stranger you're trying to impress. That's when I knew I'd already lost her. Her 18th birthday should have been beautiful. I planned something special. I baked her favorite cake, the one I'd made for every birthday since she was 1. I decorated the house with streamers and balloons. I'd been saving up to buy her a laptop she'd wanted for college. I was trying so hard to hold on to something that was already gone. Around lunchtime, a silver car pulled into our driveway. Through the window, I watched Claire step out of it, holding wrapped boxes that looked expensive. She wore designer clothes and sunglasses. She looked like a wealthy woman playing a role. She didn't knock. She just walked in like she owned the place. The atmosphere in our home shifted immediately. It became cold and electric with tension. Aaron suddenly appeared, his hair combed, wearing the cologne he only wore for special occasions. He'd known. He'd been expecting her. Lila's face lit up in a way I'd never seen. Not for my cake. Not for the home I'd decorated. For Claire. Lila announced her plans without hesitation. She was 18 now. An adult. She was moving in with her real mom. The word real cut deeper than any blade. Claire stood there with a satisfied smirk, watching me like a predator watches wounded prey. Aaron looked at the floor and said, "Maybe it's for the best." Those words. Those 6 words. That's when I understood that I'd been fighting alone the entire time. That my marriage was already over. That my daughter had never really been mine. Days turned into weeks after she left. The house felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with missing furniture. It was the emptiness of silence where there should have been life. Aaron started drinking more. He'd come home late and head straight to the liquor cabinet. He'd sit in the dark living room and just stare at nothing. I asked him what he was thinking about. He said he didn't know. I knew. He was thinking about Claire. One night I found him crying in our bedroom with an old photograph. It was a picture from years ago, from when Claire still lived in our town. Aaron was holding baby Lila, and Claire was standing beside them, smiling like she was part of our family. He was looking at that photo like it held the secret to happiness. I stood in the doorway and asked him directly, "Are you in love with her?" He didn't deny it. He just nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. I never stopped, he admitted. I married you because it was the right thing to do. I raised Lila because I had to. But my heart has always belonged to Claire. That confession destroyed me in a way her leaving never could have. Because it meant that every single thing I'd done, had been built on the foundation of a man who was already committed to someone else. My sacrifice had never been noble. It had just been convenient. I filed for divorce the next morning. Aaron called me cold for it. He said I was being cruel, that I should have fought harder to keep our family together. I looked at him and said something I meant with every fiber of my being. Cold women don't burn anymore. I was done. Done fighting. Done sacrificing. Done waiting for him to choose me. The divorce proceedings were devastating financially. The courts weren't interested in my sacrifice. They looked at papers and saw a woman who'd stayed home. A woman without significant income. A woman who was financially dependent on her husband. Aaron's lawyer painted me as someone trying to punish him for his affair. I lost almost everything. The house, the savings I'd built before we were married, even the pictures of Lila that were technically filed under joint property. I signed the papers without reading them carefully, too numb to care. Months later, I saw a photo on social media. Claire had posted it. It showed her with Aaron and Lila at a fancy restaurant. They were all smiling, holding champagne glasses. The caption read, "My real family. My real family." Like the 18 years I'd spent raising Lila meant nothing. Like the marriage I'd fought to save was just a mistake. Like I'd been a placeholder all along, keeping things warm until the real family could come together. I moved into a small apartment with faded carpet and walls that were permanently stained from the previous tenants. It was all I could afford on my own. My corporate job was long gone. I'd sacrificed my career for a man who was never mine and a child who no longer wanted me. I sat in that apartment for 3 months and seriously considered not existing anymore. The pain was that comprehensive. But then something shifted. I realized that staying in that darkness was exactly what Claire would have wanted. It was what Aaron expected. It was what everyone who judged me along the way had predicted would happen. The abandoned woman falling apart. So I decided to do something different. I went to therapy. I started reading books about resilience and women's strength. I took online courses to become a counselor, specifically for women and children dealing with abandonment and betrayal. I transformed my pain into purpose. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping mothers who'd been left with nothing. I shared my story, the parts that still hurt to talk about. And I discovered that my pain wasn't unique. There were thousands of women who'd sacrificed everything and been discarded. Thousands of children who'd been used as pawns in games between adults. Thousands of broken families held together by someone's desperate love that wasn't enough. My story began to resonate. About a year after moving into my apartment, I wrote an anonymous blog post. I titled it, "I Raised My Husband's Love Child." I wrote about everything, the affair, the baby, the sacrifice, the betrayal, the moment my daughter called me wicked. I didn't hold back. I wrote about the pain that never really goes away, about loving someone who doesn't love you back, about choosing to raise a child who eventually chooses someone else. Something about my words touched people. The post went viral. It was shared thousands of times. Women commented with their own stories of sacrifice that had gone unappreciated. Single mothers talked about raising children that weren't biologically theirs. Daughters wrote about mothers who'd given everything. The response was overwhelming. Local media started reaching out. Journalists wanted to interview me. I was hesitant, but my therapist encouraged me to share my story publicly. "Your pain has power," she said. "Use it to help others." So I did. I started giving interviews about female resilience and the invisible sacrifices women make. The interviews led to speaking engagements. Speaking engagements led to a book deal. Before I fully understood what was happening, I'd become an advocate for women's empowerment and resilience. I founded the Haven Project, a support center for single mothers and foster children dealing with abandonment and family trauma. The center started small, just in a rented office space, but it grew quickly. Women who'd read my story or heard me speak came looking for help. I could help them because I'd been there. I understood the specific pain of loving someone who wasn't legally yours and having that love questioned or dismissed. The Haven Project began offering free counseling, support groups, and resources. It became something bigger than me. Then one day, I received an email that made my hands shake. It was from Lila. She wanted to meet. She said she needed to talk to me about something important. I almost deleted it. I almost pretended I didn't see it. But I opened my calendar and scheduled a lunch meeting. I didn't know what to expect. Lila looked older when I saw her. At 23, she carried a weight in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She sat across from me in a cafe, playing with her coffee cup and avoiding eye contact. She started by thanking me for everything I'd done for her. But her tone was rehearsed, like she'd practiced the words in a mirror. I sensed immediately that Claire had sent her, probably to ask for money. That's when I realized Claire hadn't changed. She was still using people. She was still pulling strings. Still playing victim and perpetrator at the same time. Then Lila mentioned that there were some rumors about Claire's business. She said people were making accusations. She defended her mother vehemently, getting defensive when I simply listened without judgment. I didn't ask questions. I didn't say I told you so. I just offered to buy her lunch. She left abruptly after getting a text from Claire, apologizing as she gathered her things. That text pulled her away from me just like it always did. I realized then that some people are tethered to their own destruction, and there's nothing you can do to save them. The rumors about Claire's business turned into something much bigger. Word spread through town that she was under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Apparently, she'd been running a consulting company that promised services she never delivered. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had disappeared. Aaron's name was on some of the paperwork. Lila publicly defended them both online, posting about how they were being unfairly targeted and persecuted. She didn't see what everyone else could see. She didn't understand that the people she loved had been lying to her all along. Then I was served a subpoena. I was called to testify as a character witness, not for Claire but against her. The prosecution wanted me to speak about Claire's character, about the lies she'd told about abandoning Lila. I almost refused. Testifying meant publicly confirming everything I tried to leave behind. It meant publicly declaring that Lila's mother was a fraud. It meant stepping into the arena and fighting. But I thought about all the women who'd written to me, all the people whose lives had been helped by my willingness to speak my truth. So I showed up to court. The courtroom was bright and cold and full of people who wanted to see someone destroyed. Claire's lawyer tried to paint me as a jealous ex-wife, someone who'd stolen her client's child and was now seeking revenge. She asked leading questions designed to make me look vindictive. She tried to get me to admit that I'd manipulated Aaron, that I'd kept Lila from her mother out of spite. I stayed calm. I answered every question factually and without emotion. I spoke about finding Lila abandoned at a hospital. I spoke about the letters Claire had sent, about how she'd systematically lied to her daughter. I spoke about the truth even though the truth was painful. The prosecution presented evidence, bank records, emails, text messages showing that Claire had been systematically defrauding people for years. They showed video footage of her withdrawing money from accounts she wasn't supposed to have access to. The case was overwhelming. And then Claire broke. In the middle of cross-examination, she stood up and started screaming. "She stole everything from me," she shrieked, her face red with rage. "She stole my baby. She stole my life. She stole my love." Cameras were rolling. The entire breakdown was captured on film. That footage went viral. News outlets replayed it over and over. Public sympathy, which had been carefully balanced, shifted completely. The footage of Claire's courtroom breakdown was everywhere. News channels ran it as their lead story. People began digging into her past, discovering that her consulting business was just one of many frauds she'd perpetrated over the years. Aaron's career collapsed. His school fired him for having his name attached to fraud. He became toxic. Nobody wanted to hire him. The carefully constructed life he'd been building with Claire fell apart spectacularly. Lila disappeared from social media. She stopped posting, stopped commenting, stopped pretending that everything was fine. Then a new post appeared. It was a letter, posted publicly on her social media account. She wrote about how she'd been manipulated by her mother. She wrote about the lies she'd been told about me. She wrote about realizing too late that love didn't measure itself through grand gestures and promises. Real love showed up every day. Real love sacrifice without expecting a reward. Real love was what I'd shown her for 18 years. The letter went viral. And then my phone rang. It was Lila. "I need to see you," she said. When Lila arrived at my apartment, she looked broken in a way I'd never seen before. Her beautiful face was streaked with tears. Her designer clothes couldn't hide the fact that she was falling apart. She sat on my couch and told me the truth about what had happened with Claire and Aaron. She explained how Claire had manipulated her, using her as a pawn to get close to Aaron, to access his bank accounts, to build whatever scheme she'd been constructing. Lila felt used. She felt discarded. She understood for the first time what abandonment really meant. "I thought she wanted me," Lila whispered. "I thought she chose me. But she was just using me to get to Dad. She didn't care about me at all." I listened. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't recite all the warnings I'd given her. I just let her grieve. Let her understand on her own timeline what her biological mother actually was. "I finally understand what you meant by love," Lila said finally. "I understand why you did what you did. I understand why you never left, why you stayed even when Dad was useless. You loved me. Actually loved me. Not for what I could give you. Just loved me. I held my daughter while she cried for all the time she'd wasted, all the bridges she'd burned, all the forgiveness I'd offered that she'd never thought to ask for." Lila asked if she could move back in. I hesitated. That hesitation was important, because I needed her to understand that my love wasn't infinite, that I had boundaries now, that the days of sacrificing myself without question were over. But I also needed her to know that I did love her, that I had never stopped. So I said yes, but with conditions. She would need to be in therapy. We would need family therapy together. She would need to take accountability for the things she'd said and done. She agreed to all of it. I also asked her to volunteer at the Haven Project. I wanted her to understand viscerally what abandonment looked like for other children. I wanted her to see how many families had been destroyed by the same kinds of lies that Claire had told. Over the following months, we slowly rebuilt our relationship. It wasn't the same as before. There was a scar there now, a permanent mark from the betrayal. But it was real. It was honest. It was based on who we actually were, not on fantasies or sacrifices that were never asked for. 6 months after Lila moved back in, Aaron showed up at my door. He was homeless. He'd lost his job, his money, his reputation. Claire had been arrested for embezzlement and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He had nothing left. He was broken in a way that was almost unrecognizable. He begged me to forgive him. He said he'd been a coward, that he'd let his own weakness destroy our family. He asked if he could stay with us. I looked at him for a long moment, this man I'd once loved with everything I had, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hatred, but also no love. Just a hollow recognition of the person he'd chosen to be. "I forgave you a long time ago," I told him. "But forgiveness doesn't mean you get to come back. It means I've decided not to carry the weight of what you did. That's for me, not for you." He left crying, but I didn't feel sorry for him. I'd spent enough energy on Aaron's feelings. I'd spent enough years waiting for him to become someone better. I was done. When Aaron left, Lila watched from her bedroom doorway. After he was gone, she came downstairs and sat beside me. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Those 2 words held so much weight. They held the years of pushing me away, the letters hidden from Claire, the choices made to hurt me. They held all the time she'd called me wicked and meant it. "I know," I replied. "And I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I couldn't make it all work. I'm sorry I couldn't be enough to keep everyone together." Lila grabbed my hand. "You were always enough," she said. "Everyone else just couldn't see it." We sat like that for a while, not talking, just being together. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense. It was more like understanding. We both understood now that love doesn't always have a happy ending. Sometimes love just means showing up, choosing each other repeatedly, building something real from something broken. The Haven Project expanded nationally. I started getting invitations to speak at universities and conferences. The book I'd written became a bestseller. I appeared on television shows talking about women's resilience and the hidden sacrifices mothers make. I built a career from my pain. I built an empire from ashes, just like I'd promised myself I would. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer dismissed. I was recognized for my strength and my contribution to helping others. Lila became one of my most important staff members. She ran our youth counseling program, helping teenagers who'd been abandoned by their parents. She used her own story to help other kids understand that sometimes the love you're seeking comes from unexpected places. She became a beautiful, strong, compassionate woman. A woman I was genuinely proud to know. One night, we were preparing for a national conference where I would be speaking. Lila helped me with my presentation. She read through my speech and started crying. "Do you still love me?" she asked suddenly. The question hung in the air between us. I realized she was still afraid, still wondering if my love had an expiration date. I told her the truth. "Love doesn't vanish," I said. "It just stops waiting." I embraced her, but I kept my boundaries firm. I was no longer a woman who sacrificed herself for people who didn't appreciate it. I was no longer a woman who waited for others to choose me. I was a woman who had chosen herself, and that choice had set me free. That night, I stood on a stage in front of 2,000 people and told my story. I talked about raising Lila, about Aaron's betrayal, about the moment she'd called me wicked. I talked about the pain that never really goes away but can be transformed into something powerful. I talked about the 16 years I'd spent building the Haven Project, about the thousands of women and children we'd helped. And I ended my speech with the words that had become my mantra. "They once called me wicked," I said. "They said I was cold, that I was cruel, that I was stealing someone else's child. But wicked women don't sacrifice their lives for people they love. Wicked women don't stay and fight when leaving would be easier. Wicked women don't build empires dedicated to helping others heal from the same kind of pain they've experienced. I am not wicked. I am a survivor. I am a mother. I am a woman who learned that the only person I need to choose me is myself." The auditorium erupted in applause. Lila sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face. When I finished, she stood up and started clapping. Around her, 2,000 other people stood up too. They were standing for me, for Lila, for every woman who'd been called wicked for simply refusing to disappear. That night, after the standing ovation had ended, Lila came backstage. She hugged me, and when she pulled back, she whispered the words I'd been waiting 18 years to hear again. The simple word that meant I'd finally been chosen. "Mom," she said. "I'm so proud of you, Mom." And in that moment, standing under the bright lights of a stage I'd built from my own pain, I understood something fundamental. The revenge I'd wanted wasn't destruction. It was success. It wasn't making them suffer. It was refusing to suffer anymore. It was building something beautiful from the ashes of my broken life, and inviting others to heal alongside me. They tried to call me wicked, but in the end I became a woman who saved the world, one broken heart at a time.